Then followed one similar to that of Luke, then one similar to that of Mark, and the final one was like that of Matthew. After the reading, the people collected in little groups, and we, with Jas, sought Email, for we were curious to know the meaning of it all. We were told that these records were read each day at the meeting, and that this place was the center of the country where these scenes were enacted long years ago. We remarked the similarity of these happenings with those chronicled in our Bible, and were told that there was no question but that some of the earlier scenes as chronicled in our Bible were taken from these records. But those happenings of a later date, such as the crucifixion, took place elsewhere, the whole reaching its climax in the birth and the life of Christ. The foremost thought of it all was the search for the Christ in man, and to show those who had wandered away from the ideal that the Christ lived in them as he always had. Email went on to say it does not matter where the scenes were enacted, it is the underlying spiritual significance which we wish to perpetuate. We spent the balance of the afternoon and the next day making comparisons and taking notes. Space will not permit the inclusion here of those notes and comparisons, but the spiritual meaning will be understood by reading these chapters mentioned above. We found that the father of Email's nephew, who read the records to us, was born in the village and was a direct descendant of John, and that it was a custom for some member of the family to come to this place at this time and read these records. The temple above us was the one where Zacharias and John both had worshipped. We found that our friends wished to be on their way, so it was arranged that Jas would stay with us and the others would go on. We finished with the records the next day, then left the temple early the morning after. Although the hour was early, nearly all the villagers were up to bid us Godspeed. Chapter 22. The next 5 days, our trail led through the country that John had traveled. The 5th day brought us to the village where our horses were waiting for us. Here Email met us, and from this time on the traveling was comparatively easy to the village where Email lived. As we neared this village, we could see that the country was more thickly populated, and the roads and trails were far better than any we had traveled. Our way led along the fertile valley, and we were following this valley to what happened to be a level plateau. We noticed that the valley was gradually getting narrower as we went on, and at last the walls came in so close on each side of the stream that they formed a canyon. About 4 o'clock of the day we reached the village. We came suddenly to a perpendicular bluff over which the stream fell in a drop of about 300 feet. The road led to a level place at the foot of the cliff near the falls. We found that there was an opening cut in the sandstone on an angle of 45 degrees to the plateau above, and steps had been hewn in the floor so the upraise so that the ascent was an easy one. Great stone doors had been so arranged that they could be closed into the opening at the foot of the cliff, thus presenting a formidable barrier to an intruding foe. When we reached the plateau above, we found the stairway up the incline was the only means of egress or ingress that the creek afforded. At one time there had been three means of access, but the walls that surrounded the village had not been rebuilt in such a way as to bar all possible access. A great many houses in the village were built so that one wall formed a part of the wall that surrounded the village. We noted that when the houses formed part of the wall, these houses were usually 3 stories high, and there were no openings for windows in the wall until the 3rd story was reached. At every opening, a balcony was built large enough for 2 or 3 people to stand upon comfortably. These, we judged, were arranged so that a lookout could be kept at all times. We were told the district was once inhabited by a native tribe that isolated themselves from the others until, as a tribe, they had disappeared, a few having been assimilated by the other tribes. This was Emal's home, and the place where we were to meet the members of our party who had divided into small groups in order to cover more territory. Upon inquiry, we found we were the first to arrive and that the others would be in the next day. We were assigned to one of the houses built into the wall of the village. The windows of the third story looked out over the rugged mountainous country to the south. We were made comfortable and were told that supper would be served on the first or ground floor. We went down and found Emal, his sister, her husband, and the son and daughter that we had met at the temple a few days before, seated at the table. We had no sooner finished supper than we heard a commotion in the little square which the house faced. One of the villagers came in and announced that our chief and his party had arrived. They were made comfortable. Then we all proceeded to the roof. The sun had gone down, but the afterglow still lingered. The view we looked out upon resembled a large basin at the conflux of a number of streams coming down in deep gorges from the higher mountains. These streams all entered the larger stream before it flowed over the steep wall of rocks into the valley below, thus forming the waterfall. This larger stream emerged from a deep canyon and ran over the level plateau but a few hundred feet before it plunged over the precipice. A number of smaller streams flowed over the perpendicular wall of the canyon, cut by the larger stream, forming perpendicular falls and in some cases roaring torrents. Some fell in sheer drops of 100 or 200 feet, while others had cut their way into the canyon wall and fell in a succession of cataracts. Far up in the mountains, the gulches were filled with glaciers, and these glaciers projected like giant fingers from the great snow cap that covered the top of the entire range. The wall to protect the village had been joined to that of the larger gorge, where it jutted out upon the level plain that ran out to the cliff where the water dropped into the valley below. Where this wall joined the wall of the gorge, the mountain rose perpendicular for 2,000 feet, thus creating a natural barrier as far as the eye could see. We were told that the level plateau extended for 60 miles east and west, and in some places was 30 miles north and south, and the only other means of access was at the widest part of the plateau, where a trail led over a pass, and this pass was guarded by a wall similar to the one where we were. While we were talking over the advantages of the location for defense, Emal's sister and her daughter joined us, and a little later, Emal, his sister's husband, and son came up. We noticed an undercurrent of excitement, and were soon told by Emal's sister that they were expecting a visit from their mother that evening. She said, "We are so happy that we can hardly contain ourselves, for we do love Mother so. We love all that have gone on to the higher attainments very dearly, for they are so fine and noble and helpful. But our own Mother is so sweet and adorable, so helpful and loving. We cannot help loving her 1,000 times more. Besides, we are of her flesh and blood. We know you will love her as we do." We asked whether she came often. The reply was, "Oh yes, she always comes when we need her. But she is so taken up with her work that she comes only twice a year of her own accord, and this is one of her semi-annual visits. She is to stay a week this time, and we are all so happy we scarcely know what to do." Here the talk drifted to experiences of our associates while we were separated, and we were deep in this discussion when suddenly stillness came over all, and almost before we realized it, we were sitting perfectly silent without a suggestion from anyone. The evening shadows had gathered until the far-off mountain snow-cap looked like a great white monster,